Master of the Elements, the Sorcerer is back in Diablo, and after going hands-on with the class for the first time, we have some brutally honest impressions we think you'll be interested in. My name is Codiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today, we're breaking down the Sorcerer in Diablo 4. If you don't know, the Diablo 4 Sorcerer is a Master of the Elements, specifically Fire, Frost, and Lightning. It's a real return to form for the class as the team has done away with the smoke and mirrors of the Wizard from Diablo 3, instead opting to continue down the path defined in Diablo 2. As you unlock each new skill category, you'll notice familiar spells, but as you dive in deeper, some of the subtle changes to the Diablo 4 skill tree system give many of those active skills a fresh spin. As you might expect, the Sorcerer is all about dealing damage, and while you don't have to build as a pure glass cannon, the scales lean heavy that direction. So after reaching level 25 and sinking about 15 hours into the class, I think it's time we dive in. Going into the open beta, I was convinced that the Sorcerer wasn't going to be a class I really connected with. I historically don't play a whole lot of magic-wielding classes in RPGs, and thinking back on my time with Diablo 2 as a foundation for my expectations, I was pretty sure this iteration of the Sorcerer wasn't going to do it for me, and I'm happy to say I was wrong. My true first impression of the class was that it felt familiar. It played almost exactly like the Diablo 2 Sorcerer I remember, albeit a bit slower, which I think is the case for combat in general across Diablo 4. What I really enjoyed about the class, especially early on, was the flexibility to really test the waters with each of the schools of magic. I experimented constantly with my build, and even though I only had access to a few spells, it was nice to be able to tweak things quickly and test synergies. That's really one of the main things I picked up on early. It's clear, after just a bit of testing, when abilities don't work well together, and I felt that even as I was leveling through the game. Now keep in mind, I was playing on the harder difficulty available during the open beta, Veteran or World Tier 2, so I had already planned on being punished for a sloppy skill setup, but it was clear that Glass Cannon could turn into a Glass Noodle with just a few mismatched skills. As I leveled, scooping up skill points in the process, the full scope of the Sorcerer was coming into focus. It's a strong class, even at level 25, the cap we were restricted to during the open beta. In terms of strengths, I have to say the Sorcerer has the potential to deal insane amounts of damage of both the single target and AoE varieties. I spent a good chunk of my time really trying to find a solid AoE build, and once it finally clicked into place, it was clear the Sorcerer is capable of dealing massive amounts of damage over an encounter area. The class also has some surprising self-sustain, mainly in the form of barriers. I was really caught off guard with how much I liked having these as part of my main loadout. Because skills can be enhanced within the skill tree, not only did barriers help me stay alive, they also provided important benefits like mana regeneration. There's also decent flexibility within defensive skills based on your playstyle, which I think will make a lot of players happy. I'd also say the class can bring some crowd control to a group. This really comes down to building your Sorcerer with team play in mind, but if done correctly, the Frost and Lightning spells do provide a substantial amount of crowd control in the form of slows and stuns. Now, as expected, the Sorcerer does have some predictable shortcomings, and they're apparent right from the get-go. The class is incredibly mana dependent. This becomes a huge issue on both the offensive and defensive side of things, and because there's not a dedicated mana potion, you have to be incredibly smart about how you build your character with mana regen in mind. This will absolutely influence the way players build out endgame Sorcerers and could have a profound impact on the meta because even at low levels, it's obvious that a mana-starved Sorcerer is no good for anyone. When the mana does run dry, it exposes a lot of issues, especially when it comes to survivability. This is when the class is at its most vulnerable, and you have to rely on good positioning, your teammates, and a bit of luck to help you get through a scrap. You also need to know how your skills can help you regain mana fastest, which is why build synergy is such an important factor for the Sorcerer. Finally, forget about mobility. Outside of teleport, the Sorcerer is really a turret, which is why I suspect the team gave us a number of options for defensive barriers. Even teleport, for all its nostalgia and previous exploitation, seems to have been restricted quite a bit. Even still, outside of that, options are limited, and that means positioning and combat awareness becomes far more important. Heading into the open beta, I was convinced that the Sorcerer class mechanic enchantments was going to be a great system. Taking active skills, making them passive, and getting a strong buff in the process seemed too good to be true, but in practice, it plays out even better than I had hoped. What really won me over was the unique class mechanics synergy with Diablo 4's gearing system. When equipped, some gear, namely legendaries, will reward you with skill points that boost the level or completely unlock skills you may or may not have unlocked already. This is another throwback to Diablo 2 and ties in perfectly with the enchantment system because you can use those unlocked skills that you would otherwise wouldn't want to weave into your playstyle and slot them as passive, securing a powerful buff in the process. A perfect example is this. One piece of gear I had gave me +1 to Meteor that unlocked the skill, but it really didn't fit into my current build. Ideally, I get a piece of gear that synergizes better with my build, but short of that, I chose to enchant Meteor, making it passive and locking in a buff and another layer to my combat. Enchantments is a solid, straightforward system, and while it doesn't really do much to further the class identity the way other unique class mechanics do, it's practical and will be an integral part of the build experience for sorcerers the endgame. Throughout my time with the open beta, I really wanted to stress test the Sorcerer in both solo and group content, and depending on what your situation is, really dictates how you build out your character. Like I've mentioned a few times now, there is flexibility with the kit, but based on if you have a group to protect you or not, really determines how much you have to balance offensive and defensive skills. Personally, I always opt for some sort of defensive capabilities, regardless of if I'm playing with a group, mainly because I know my positioning isn't always great. Something like Ice Armor that provides an overshield protecting your health pool is designed for solo play, whereas something like Flame Shield, while still a strong defensive, allows you to build a bit more offensively. As you might expect, until you get a series of skills working in harmony together, trying to play Sorcerer solo is actually pretty challenging, mainly because of the issues we outlined before: mana dependency, lack of survivability, and mobility. Without a team to protect you against enemies, you'll spend a lot of time moving around, which can cut into the time you would otherwise be casting. I can't say confidently that once you hit level 25 and you have access to your first ultimate skill, this balance of power does shift. At that point, I had enough skills that I was able to take out most enemies quickly without having to worry about them surrounding me. It's truly a case of the best defense is a good offense, and that even becomes the case when playing solo. However, it's a fine balance, and it's something you have to actively manage as you level up, gaining new skills and facing an increasingly dangerous world. As I mentioned earlier, the Diablo 4 Sorcerer will feel familiar to folks who played Diablo 2. There are a couple of skills, both old and new, I wanted to highlight because I think they're pretty interesting. Starting with something brand new, check out Inferno, a new spell that summons a fiery serpent that constricts around an area, dealing burn damage to all enemies caught in the AoE. Another cool ultimate skill is Deep Freeze. For 4 seconds, you freeze yourself, dealing damage to enemies around you and slowing them. After those 4 seconds are up, you explode, dealing massive damage to enemies in a large area. There are also some returning spells worth highlighting, like Chain Lightning, which bounces off a half dozen targets, dealing solid damage in the process. There's also Hydra, which became a staple of my level 25 kit. When cast, a multi-headed Hydra pops out of the ground and then starts shooting fireballs at nearby enemies. The ability can be augmented quite a bit through the skill tree, and the damage is ridiculous. Finally, it's worth calling out an old favorite, Blizzard. This AoE frost attack deals high damage over a few seconds and slows any enemies caught in the area. This became an essential part of my kit as it brings good damage and utility to the table. Of course, there are plenty more skills to check out, and with only a handful of skill points to play with during the open beta, it's impossible to know what skills are going to rise to the top once we reach the endgame and build out our characters. Before we wrap, I wanted to quickly talk about build potential. It's no secret that Diablo is known for its meta builds, the ones everyone has to play in order to beat the hardest content, but I'm actually fairly confident the team has designed the skill tree system in a way that does encourage exploration. In the case of the Sorcerer, the lines of delineation are pretty clear. You have 3 schools of magic, and those skills all have important secondary effects you'd need to consider when building out your character. It would be easy to mix and match and create a terrible build with no synergy, but it's also possible to really weave together skills that complement one another. Just through my testing, it does seem like you'd have to lean into one school of magic as your primary focus, but that could be any of the 3. After that, you'll look to augment that focus with additional skills from any of the schools of magic that complement the primary focus. So, for example, you could choose to focus on a frost build that emphasizes crowd control. By choosing a few key lightning skills on top of that, the 2 schools of magic could work in harmony to amplify the damage as well. I can't say for sure how diverse the builds will be. I think that's something we just won't know until we reach the end game, but for now, I'm happy with the flexibility during the leveling experience. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of our experience with the Sorcerer in Diablo 4. Don't get it twisted, it's a glass cannon. It's always going to be a glass cannon. But the team has done a decent job of sprinkling in some other skills that make the leveling and solo experience a bit more manageable. Ultimately, it's important to ask, is the Sorcerer fun to play? And my simple answer is yes. Friends, we hope you're enjoying our Diablo 4 coverage. While content was limited during the open beta, we look forward to checking out and creating even more videos when the game goes live on June 6. As always, if Diablo is on your radar and you want more content like this, including deeper guides and eventually some fun builds, hit that like button and consider subscribing. We also plan on opening up a Diablo 4 clan once the game goes live on June 6, so if that's something you're interested in, consider joining Legacy Gaming on Discord. Our open beta clan filled up on day 1, so keep an eye on chat and be sure to stay tuned for more information come launch. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching and play on.